you see a lot of priests criticizing the orthobros and not happy with the orthobros. And I'm like, you should be very happy with the orthobros. On the one hand, I get it, because sometimes they're very aggressive and they have this thing, but they have that energy, right? They have that energy of the new person that comes in and wants to be able to make sure that they're on the inside. And that's totally normal. Like it's an inevitable part of a new person in any group, right? Imagine even like a sports team, you have a new person coming in, you think they're going to have to prove themselves, so they're going to be extra energetic.
Yeah.
But it is true that there is a danger in this wave of young guys coming in and spending all their time trying to figure out like who's a heretic and who's not a heretic, and just kind of heretic hunting.
Welcome, my name's Paul, and this is a conversation with one of the biggest, most influential thinkers in my life over the last 5 or 6 years, Jonathan PAGEAU. I'm really happy to be publishing a second interview with him. And I've really been focusing a lot of my time and my energy recently looking at this word patriarchy. So that's what I've centered our conversation around. And what I'm trying to do is to have a conversation about patriarchy, which is outside of the kind of mainstream noise and clamor and confusion there is around that term, because a lot of the time kind of people talk about the word patriarchy as if it means tyranny. And actually, I strongly believe, and I think there's a very good case to be made, that tyranny and patriarchy have nothing to do with each other. In fact, they are opposed to each other. The natural reaction of a father is to love his child and care for his child. And that is irrespective if you're coming from a Christian perspective or even just like a biological Darwinian perspective. So a lot of interesting things came out of this conversation, some surprising things, I think, especially if you're looking at from this kind of like mainstream patriarchal idea. And most importantly, I think that Jonathan's a guy where I was really able to experience what I would call is a model of a patriarchal type of relationship in a friendship and a brotherhood with him as well. So looking forward to sharing it with you. Here we go. Jonathan PAGEAU, good to see you again after you've been globetrotting around the whole world, Mt Athos with your family and who knows what.
It's good to be here. It's good to talk to you again. It's been a while.
Yeah. So maybe just for people who have been seeing a little bit of your emails around, can you tell us what have you been up to and how's it back? How's it like being back in Canada again?
Yeah, well, I guess, when COVID ended, I kind of went crazy and just accepted all the offers that people were putting in my direction. And so we ended up going on a long trip with the family, 6 weeks. Part of it was because my wife is from Slovakia and my kids had never been to Slovakia. So I was planning this trip to Mt Athos with my son. And so my wife said, hey, since you're already going to Europe, we should kind of do this as a family for a little while. So we went to Slovakia, met with my wife's family. It was really wonderful for the kids to meet their European cousins. It was really great. Traveled to Prague, visited Prague with the kids, and then went to Paris, went to France for a little while. Finally, I went to Mt Athos with my son, which was just really astounding. We were there for a week.
And your dad as well, am I right?
Yeah. So my father came and met with us in Thessaloniki, and we went to Mt Athos together, all three of us. Wow. It was funny to watch monks do Trinity jokes when they would see us, because we look like each other quite a bit. My father looks like me and I look like my son. And so they would always look at us and do this like double take and then start doing Trinity jokes, which it's good to know that monks are willing to go there. We sometimes think they're. Yeah. So it was quite astounding. I mean, Mt Athos is so encouraging. At least for me, it was quite encouraging just because, there you have a lot of young monks. It's not just old monks. There's also the monasteries are all being renovated massively, and so they're either they're pristine or they're on their way to be pristine. And there's this sense of just a lively monastic life there. So it was really encouraging for me to go there, and then also just to have so much time in prayer before leaving. I was kind of losing my mind. I'd gotten into so many things, with the symbolic world and publishing the graphic novel, and all these problems they just weren't being solved. Our website was falling apart, and the books that we sent to Europe weren't getting there. And I was just drowning in worry. And thinking that I was in charge. I think that I was the one who was controlling everything and that I had to take it all on myself. And so going to Europe for 6 weeks was the stupidest thing ever. I mean, it was just so ridiculous to do that, but it actually ended up saving me to some extent, because sitting there in the church at Mt Athos, 6 hours a day from the middle of the night until until the morning, and not understanding Greek, what are you going to do? You just pray. You just at first you're like, well, what am I? So you end up praying, doing the Jesus prayer, also kind of just lifting up the different things that worrying you, and also the people that you love. And I came back with a much calmer stance, and the problems weren't solved completely, but I just had a different attitude towards it, and just decided I'm going to do things one at a time. That's all I can do, is just here are the things that I have to do. I just do them, try not to be lazy, try not to be distracted, just do the things. And then, it's weird how it happens. Then everything got solved. Not everything, but many of the things got solved as soon as I got back from Europe. So glory to God for that. It was a wonderful trip, really.
Well, congratulations on the New Symbolic World website. I've been in on it. I've actually found it to be a thriving, active online community already, and already made a couple of new connections in there. So that's really nice. I really like that people have their real names in there instead of it being these weird pseudonyms, which I really don't like about some other social media. And yeah, I got to say, I actually had the opportunity to visit Mt Athos, also with two other guys, not my father and my son, unfortunately, in February this year. But yeah. Getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning to start the day's services in Russian or Greek was intense, but certainly the thing that I've come back with is just like a realization of being able to relax into realizing I'm not in control, and seeing how these people are following. They're just marinated in the pattern of existence at the very deepest level. They've just been following for over 1,000 years. There was quite an experience.
Yeah, it's good to know that exists. There are moments where Mount Athos felt, in the history of the mountain, where it felt like it was not going to survive, even just, in the 90s, maybe, like, like not that long ago in the late 20th century. And so really, it's wonderful that it has been so rejuvenated, and it's, meeting some of the older monks and seeing the calmness in their eyes, like a kind of peace in their eyes, is really something, because there's one thing to know about holiness, but when you meet someone, and you don't know, like, I don't know if they're saints or if they're, what their destiny is, but I met several older monks, that had just a transparent joy in their face. Their face was light. It didn't have these bags that we kind of end up having just by the weight of our, trying to take the weight of the world on our shoulders. So that was really, to me, it gave me a lot of hope, and it gave me a way, like, to remember. It's like, remember what's important, right? To just remember, where life is. So it was great.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So before we dive into the topic of today, which is going to be the first recording that I'm doing for our new season of the podcast Iron Sharpens Iron, where we decided from our first season, the topic that really came out that we decided we needed to dive into is this word patriarchy. What is that? How does it play into and give us a key to understanding our existence? Why do feminists hate it so much and have been attacking it so much? And how can we understand it? Because there's so much noise around that term. So when we discuss in a space that's free from that noise, we can actually dive deeper. So I'm really looking forward to getting some input back from you. I just want to mention before I dive into that a little bit about with my work and how that's been developing. Because of course you came over. It's getting on to 3 years ago. You were over
I mean, it was right in the middle of COVID. So was it 2020? Was it 2020? Maybe. Wow, that's crazy.
2021, maybe
2021. So it's not that 2 years. 2 years.
Yeah.
I've been curious to know, because I've been kind of watching you on the corner of my eye, seeing you, shift and move and stuff. So I'm happy to hear about that.
Yeah. So I mean, with COVID, we really needed to move a lot of our work to being online groups. And what I'd kind of before sworn off any doing kind of online work. Given that I've been working in Microsoft for 8 years and was tired of that. But actually what I found is that when it comes to if we
we've established now a network of groups of guys that are working together. We have a very simple method. Each person formulates a vision for where he wants to move towards in his life. He then sets concrete goals on a quarterly basis that he's going to use to kind of orientate himself towards moving towards that vision. And then what they spend a lot of the time doing, these groups meet every single week, they build individual habits that, like, every single day, you're doing stuff that's going to help you to be kind of moving that right direction. And so we're much more now built on implicit Christian values. We're not only for Christian men. Most of the guys are still not Christian, but and in the leadership group, we talk about kind of high level abstractive metaphysics and things like that. But for the everyday members, we actually keep those discussions away from them, because a lot of guys, they just spend a lot of time, doing this stuff. It becomes like a mental mind game, and it's not valuable on the online world. What we found is, like, instead, so most of us meet like once a year or something like that. The groups, they meet up. But we're really focusing in on that thing. And then, as I know, I've moved out to this little farm in the countryside here, and we're doing more in-person work out here. I'm trying to really address it to just like the guys who live out here, but that's been valuable. So a lot of it's actually been with physical training. I joined the Danish Home Guard, and I'm taking the Defense Force physical training principles and converting them into kind of courses for normal civilians. And a lot of it's like, just like learning how to use a map and a compass to be able to navigate in the terrain. It's a really good metaphor for navigating in life as well. Yeah. And instead of just following Google to tell you where to go all the time, right? And so people have good bonding experiences out in nature doing that kind of thing as well.
Oh, that's great. And are you still doing kind of are you still going to do some of the big events, like have people come and do the yearly thing?
That is being put on hold for a little bit of time. I don't know when we're going to be ready for that yet. Right now, I have had guys for vision retreats in really small groups. So we've been up to like 10, 12, but most of them was like 4 or 5 guys at a time. We're doing vision retreats. So really focusing on depth right now. Before, we're doing up to 140 men, all having a kind of rite of passage initiation, some more pagan elements in there, which were really fun. And that's where we came from before I converted to Orthodoxy, of course. But we haven't done that again now, and we're not planning to do it this year. So let's see if that comes up again. I will plug in here though that this October I'm going to be traveling to Detroit together with Father Hans Jacobsy, and Father Michael Butler is going to be hosting at his parish. We're going to I think we have space for 140, 150 men there for a men's gathering, which is going to be under the title Beloved Sons. And so that's going to be a big men's gathering, and Father Michael has a yearly male bonding party that he'll be hosting after that gathering as well. That'll be coinciding with that date.
Yeah, I was really happy to see you be more involved with Father Hans and Father Michael. Both are people that I've encountered at different moments in my life. Father Hans, I don't think he even remembers. I saw him several years ago, and he prayed for me in the church one time, and it was very powerful. Like it really changed I don't know why, like it just him standing next to me and praying with me and for me. There was something about that really changed my perspective on certain things. So I have very good memories of both of those men.
It's been incredibly insightful. They have very different approaches and ways of going into the Orthodox faith and men's work. And I could say Father Hans has that like kind of logos orientated, high level revelatory, when I listen to him, sometimes I'm like, wow, like I've never heard that approach before. It's a little bit like listening to you sometimes, but he has like more of the kind of fire, I won't call it fire and brimstone, but definitely like the declaration approach of understanding the faith. And then Father Michael's fantastic for like the everyday kind of gathering together and the brotherly closeness of understanding our faith as well. So that's, yeah, very, very, it's a privilege to be working with them. Absolutely.
That's great. Wow, that's wonderful.
Okay, good. So I'm going to try to dive into this subject of patriarchy, and let's see how far we get with. I've sent you a little list of points that I want to get through, but let's see how far we get. This was our main conclusion from season 1: is that the pattern of reality is patriarchal, and to live well, we have to accept that first of all, and then strive to become a well-functioning part of it, and that puts specifically responsibilities on me as a man and as a human being as well, And the primary responsibility of the way into that we see it is that there's a need for humility, which is submission to God's will, and the exercise of it will often create a lot or require a lot of courage as men. So becoming a part of God's will, there'll be a lot of resistance a lot of the time, and so there's a courage needed for that. The symbolism of masculine and feminine, if I can address it first at a high level, symbolism, there's an example that I'd like to put towards you, because I think you could perhaps give us a good insight on this. I've never heard it before, but we found that in the sacraments of the church, it's a really good way to understand this relationship between the masculine and the feminine. And so there was a guy who I spoke to who said that he attended a church that had female priests. And in their service then of celebrating the communion, the female priest, the priestess, whatever you want to call her, she held up the chalice in front of her face. And so this guy, she was facing the people in the church, and so this guy, what he said is what he saw, he saw the chalice and he saw her breasts, and he had this kind of insight that something like there's going to be a symbolic collapse here, like this is why there can't be female priests in the church, or this is why the Orthodox don't do that, because there's two sources of creativity and life here that are joined together. So the understanding that he had is that, like, the male priest is representing the logos in his maleness, and then the chalice is the body and the blood, which is the feminine that he's then lifting up, right? The logos. So and then with the female priest, he felt like there's that switch, and he even went as far as to say that can only inevitably lead to the church embracing homosexuality, because if that becomes into the central aspect of the sacrament there. So I wanted to hear it was music.
What I think of that. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of that one?
That's hilarious. So, no, I think that the idea that the pattern of reality is patriarchal is something like a technically true statement. You know, it's the idea that patterning is something which is seen as masculine. That's why the image of heaven and earth, or the Father in heaven, you know, and then the earth below, this is the image that we have. And so the patterning of the seed, you know, if you understand the seed as the pattern, it's a good way to see that, right? The seed comes from above and comes down below into the earth, and then the earth is that which gives body, like you said. And so the earth is the multiplying factor. And so you have, on the one hand, the pattern, and then you have the variation, and you need both. Without that, there's no world, right? You need both, something like the name, and then something like the possibility of that name of having body. And so when you say something like the pattern of the world is patriarchal, it's not even like a, but it's not like an arbitrary statement of power. It's just seeing how the world functions and understanding that. Now, one of the interesting things about Christian patriarchy is that it resolves some of the issues that, you know, that problem has, which is that, you know, in a pyramidal system, right, in a system that has like the head above and the body below, you can see it tyrannically. Like, you can see it just as the king or the emperor or the pharaoh wielding power on the people. But what Christianity seems to offer is the idea of love, first of all, right? Of understanding that as a relationship of love between a husband and a wife, but then also of sacrifice. You know, that's why the cross is at the top of the hill. So, you know, the Christian patriarch is the one who washes the feet. And so what does that mean? It's difficult for us now because we're such egalitarians that we think that it's owed to us that our feet are washed, right? But that's not what the story says, right? Christ says, "You are my friends," to his disciples. But it's not the disciples saying to Christ, "Hey, buddy, you're my buddy," right? And so the condescension of hierarchy in Christianity both reestablishes the hierarchy and then recasts it in a way that is self-sacrificial. Mm-hmm. So it says Christ is above us, and then we notice Christ giving himself to us, right? That's why St. Peter, when Christ washes his feet, is like he's not saying, well, finally, like, this is what I deserve, because you need to come down to our level. He's like, what is going on? Like, this is crazy. This is unacceptable, right? And so this is the in some ways the paradox of Christian hierarchy, right? Is we need to recognize those that are above us as being in authority, and then celebrate them, or celebrate it when those act in the image of God and kind of give themselves to us. So that's the first thing that I want to say about that, just because, when we say, even myself, who is like this Mr. Symbolism, when I hear like the pattern of reality is patriarchal, I've got alarm bells going off in my head, because I know that a lot of people will hear that and think of it as, just an authoritarian move that is being done on our part. So that's the first thing. And then I think what you said about the problem of female priests is exactly right. It's you could say that it's interesting, because it's not a simple thing. It's not a simple male-female relationship. The priest, in some ways, it's like when the priest looks up, the priest is acting in a feminine way, you could say, right? It's like when the priest receives from above, but then when the priest offers to us, then that's the switch, right? And so it's important to understand that that's how actually reality works. It's like everybody is feminine to something, right? Everybody receives from above and then gives below. So it's not like it's not just a simple equation. And so the reason why Christians have male priests is very simple, is because that's what we see. Like, what we see is the authority, and that authority has a masculine characteristic. They represent Christ to us, and that has a masculine characteristic. And also because the priest especially the priest during the liturgy, is an official representative, right? The priest is not a saint. I don't know what to tell you, right? The priest is not by de facto a saint. The priest can have all kinds of faults, and the sacramentality of what they're doing is something like a policeman or a judge, or right. It's an official function that they're doing. And so, and that's why one of the reasons why people get confused. It's like, well, are you saying that only men can be holy? Only men can? It's like, no, we're not saying that, because the saints can be anything. Like, a saint can be a woman, can be any kind of person, whereas the priest not only has to be a male, he has to have testicles. Like, it's like there are certain requirements of the priest. He has to be able to stand up, he has to be able to speak loudly, there are all these things that are required of the priest in order for him to be able to play the let's say the ritual role that he's playing.
Yeah, and the physicality, I was actually surprised as I dive into understanding the physicality and the importance of that. Also, like, for example, this idea that we can't have a bleeding wound when the priest is serving, and the role of, like, also the writings about women and having their, and after childbirth as well, and just bleeding and coming in. So there's like a real specificity to, so would you also agree with this idea that the bread and the wine in the chalice is the feminine, and then the masculine representing it there?
It's fractal. It's complicated,
like
because it's fractal thing. Like, so you could say the bread comes from heaven, that's the bread that we're getting during the Eucharist. So it's actually a masculine, it's seed, right? It's manna from heaven. But it's different in communion. It's complicated, because it's a very complex relationship of above and below, because it's almost like when we talk about synergy in the Orthodox Church, that seems to be what's happening in communion. It's a kind of, so you could say that we take the gifts and we offer them up, and so then they are like a body that's offered up to receive the seed from heaven, right? And so you do that, but then in the communion itself, the bread represents the seed, you could say, and then the wine represents the liquid kind of earthly aspect. So it ends up being
switch then, actually, because normally the wine
switch,
is the spirits,
right? It's like a big one. It's like big and smaller and smaller. That's the way to see it. And so like the whole church represents that. The priest represents the masculine for the whole church. Then you get closer. Then the gifts represent like the church, and then the influence of heaven in the communion. But then in the communion, the bread represents the seed, and the liquid represents the earth, you could say. And so it's like it's like the description in creation is something like that in Genesis 1. So at first you have heaven and earth.
To do a little sketch for us that can to illustrate that fractal relationship.
Well, at first you have heaven and earth, right? So it's like heaven and water, and then you pull earth out of the water. But once you pull earth out of the water, the earth is akin to heaven, and water is akin to earth, right? It's like heaven, earth is above, and water is below, and it ends up being fractal that way all the time. So when God, for example, creates the animals, he creates tame animals, wild animals, and bugs. And so the tame animals are akin to heaven, the bugs are akin to like water down below, and the wild animals are in between. So it happens constantly during the symbolism. It's complicated, but that's what happens in communion as well.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Good. So we really took this down to a practical level as well, and we found that the best training ground or testing ground and learning ground for this is in marriage, in the sacrament of marriage, and the relationship between a man and his wife. And so, as you said, a large part of being a man in a Christian marriage is about self-sacrifice. But there's also an aspect that maybe has been more neglected, which is, I think Father Joseph Gleason formulates it in the kind of strongest way that I've heard, which is something like, grabbing the snake, telling it, no, that don't come and talk to my wife, stomping on its head and chasing it out of the garden or something like that, right? Like to kind of, instead of what Adam did, which was, basically saying like, oh yeah, he was there with his wife, with Eve, eating the fruit, didn't say anything, didn't react. And that's the problem that I see working with men today a lot of the time, is that guys feel like, oh, who am I to tell my wife what to do? Oh, she needs to be able to make her own decisions, and not taking the responsibility that, well, as a man, I have some kind of natural masculine striving or affinity towards reaching up and grasping some ideas. Not all men have this, of course, but I think at least there is a masculine tendency in this. My wife and I, when we were still catechumens and were, about to enter the Orthodox Church, she was busy studying theology at a Danish university, and we visited Father Zacharias in Essex, John the Baptist Monastery. And actually, Father Zacharias said to her, he said, Laura, stop studying theology, and instead you need to support Paul to start studying theology instead. And I think there was an intuition there that he had, which was something along those lines. And that's had very long consequences and been incredible. Both me and my wife are incredibly thankful today for that switch that happened there. Does that make sense?
No, I mean, I think it definitely makes sense. That there's a reason why St. Paul says, the man is the head of the family, right? The man is the head, and the woman is the body, or the woman is the image of the body. You see that in the iconology, when you see Christ above and the Virgin below, like there's this whole relationship of masculine and feminine. I definitely think that is the right way to go. It's difficult now, like, to be honest, because we've kind of lost that. We've lost that patterning. It's kind of broken in our society, and so recapturing it is difficult. I would have to say, even myself, like, I find it difficult to recapture that, because it's like we want to impose, and then we don't know how to, we don't know how to do it, or we don't know how to be a leader in the inspirational sense. In some ways you'd want to say, well, if you would want the man to be able to be in a certain way that his wife would want to follow him, and that's not easy for the modern world. So, I mean, I think I agree with you in theory. In practice, I think it's difficult, because at least if I look at my own life,
it's probably the biggest challenge.
I'm a modern person living in the modern
families
world.
And Christian. Sorry, you're saying?
No, I'm just saying I'm a modern man living in a modern world, and so I see that my relationship, like our family relationship, has more of that egalitarian quality, you know, and to some of the detriment of my relationship, I would think, to some extent. But
absolutely, yeah. So Jordan Peterson actually gave a really interesting statistic that I noticed in this conversation, which was that men who have a very high proportion of negative interactions with their spouse compared to the positive interactions, they're heading towards a divorce. But inversely, if you just have very high proportion of positive interactions and never have negative interactions, you're also heading towards a divorce.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's fake. It's got, if you're only having positive interactions, you're being fake, is what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Then you're probably being conflict avoidant and not taking this responsibility as a man. And so I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've also, you know, kind of marrying, you know, becoming Orthodox, converged Orthodox together with my girlfriend, and then getting married in the Orthodox faith. We've really had to very consciously, you know, we're 39 years old when we got married. We've lived a whole life by ourselves. And so we were very clear that we needed this faith. We needed a very clear, direct path towards God to be able to make our marriage work as well. And so the kind of pattern that I've been thinking about and working with and talking very much with my wife about as well, and this is the way I see it needs to happen, is a constant focus for me towards seeing my marriage to my wife as my path towards salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I primarily do that as a man has been, first of all, to make sure that all of my sexual energy, all of my creative energy is directed towards my wife. And using that to drive towards greater, you know, intimacy with my partner, intimacy understood on a physical, emotional, intellectual, but also eventually, of course, a spiritual level as well. And so that means that, like, and, you know, I need to notice as well how that's paying off and working, because it needs to be kind of like it's not something I can force myself to do, right? But as I see how that there's that, like, this infinite depth in my relating to my wife, then that becomes more and more interesting in my life. And then I can catch myself if I, you know, start looking at a beautiful woman in the airplane or whatever it is, or, you know, it's like get attracted to whatever images that are popping in my computer, and then focus on, well, knowing, like, and then addressing it with my wife and saying, like, hey, like, you know, I'm going to be channeling all my sexual energy to you. That's probably going to be uncomfortable for you all the time. You know, it means that I'm going to be demanding a kind of intimacy in getting close to you and understanding you. Sometimes it's easier to just like be separate from each other, right?
Yeah.
And it also means that I need to show up in my relationship and be myself and show who I am in some ways.
I mean, I think that's definitely the ideal. You know, I think that you can find that in the Church Fathers, in St. John Chrysostom. It seems that that's the way, at least for married couples, to do it. I mean, it's wonderful. It's not easy. It's like what you're describing is not an easy thing, because we live in the modern world, because we're humans, because we are also
and because our culture is absolutely saturated with men who are not taking responsibility in this way. But instead, I think the biggest temptation for men is to hand responsibility over to their wife to lead the family, to take on the priestly role of the family, instead of the man taking on the, you know, the overall guidance and shepherding of the spiritual direction and growth of his family. And when the wife does it, she does it if the man doesn't step up, right? And she'll even push back if the man tries to do it. But I think in the long term, it's to the detriment of the family.
Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right. And I think you're right in all your analyses, you know, that's true in terms of, in some ways, because there's something about in Genesis, you know, when it says, you know, when God says to Eve, you know, you will run after your husband, like you'll chase after your husband, basically. You'll try to, and there's a way in which that seems to happen too in that relationship, which is that it seems like it's difficult, because obviously women are humans just like anybody else, and so they have a tendency to want to take power, and so the question is, like you said, if you push back, then that becomes a tension. But ultimately, you think it's for the best of the family, but it's not an easy, it's not an easy path to tread. And so, you know, keep me posted as you move further and further down that line, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the pattern that I've seen so far that happens is that when I first kind of see something that I think is off, and feel quite clear and strong about it and mention it to my wife, the more that I've hit something that's really relevant, the more she's going to react negatively.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the courage comes in that I spoke about when we started this conversation. Like, it's like, I really have to be sure. I have to really be making sure I'm not just acting for my own selfish interests. But if I am certain about that, then I really need to be able to stand firm. And sometimes take a bit of flack. And not, I need to be able to apologize for where I go overboard, but also not lose sight of the overall direction of what it is that I'm trying to do. And yeah, it's a very difficult thing to do. And what I normally experience is that within a week or two, my wife gains this peace. She relaxes in a way because she realizes that Paul's actually taking very seriously where it is that that he's trying to take this family. And so even when I try and buffet him and push him, he actually just stands firm. And so I can actually trust him because he's not just doing what he thinks that I want. And if he can stand up against me and my drama, then probably he can stand up against, because the biggest opponent's often your wife, right? Like when you want to do something difficult.
Yeah, that's how old are your kids?
I have a 16-year-old son from a previous marriage, and then I have my youngest is approaching 3, and then in the next 9 days is my third son.
Oh my goodness! Wow, congratulations! Congratulations! Yeah. It's interesting because you really see what the kind of things you're saying in the kids, because in some ways a woman is normally so attached to the children and really wants to, and so it's hard. Yeah, it's a finding the capacity to kind of be a leader without being too controlling. I mean, you've kind of got me at a loss because I think these are the things that I struggle with as much as anybody. These are I'm a really good at symbolism, but when you get in terms of practice, then the rubber hits the road, and and you're trying to. I've been married now for 24 years, and at some point I've come to a point where I've also kind of decided to choose some of the battles that I think are worth it and some of the battles that aren't worth it. And it's hard to know whether that's panned out. Like, I tend to look at my kids to see whether it's panned out, and also the general dynamic of my family to see whether it's panned out. And it seems good. Like, we love being together. Like, there's a good unity. But if people kind of knew which battles I'd given up on and which battles that I've taken up, they might be surprised and think that I'm not like I should hold on to certain things. But at least in my case, I felt like there's some things that weren't worth holding on to, let's say, in terms of certain dynamics. I don't want to go into too much detail about my private life too, just because this is a public conversation, but that's the way that, at least for now, that's the way that I judge it. I look at my kids and I look at, my son who's 18, who still serves in church, like, okay, I look at what's going on and I feel like, okay, we've been able to navigate through these things and these kind of power dynamics in a successful way.
I definitely think, like having a fixed idea of the way things should be as a father and trying to enforce that, I've found can be very counterproductive. Absolutely. Again, to go back to that principle of like driving intimacy, I've really found that a good indicator for me is that if my wife is asking me for more intimacy, probably an indication that either I'm just like too busy doing other stuff and I'm avoiding our relationship, or that I'm actually just not showing up properly in our relationship. And so for me, it's like, I agree with you, like pick your battles, choose one at a time, go to the root of things, but take it very slowly. But then I'd also say, like, there needs to be a constant working through, like, it's like, yes, we want to create peace, but there needs to be a struggle because joining together with a woman entitles death of oneself and one's ego for both partners, right? Like, it's like you need to be able to give slip, let go of parts of yourself. And so there needs to be, I think there needs to be that constant. So my wife will tell you, like, sometimes it's like, ooh, sometimes I just need a break from Paul because he's like, it's so intense, right? And I kind of think like then I know like I'm doing it right. And then sometimes she says to me, Paul, like, I feel like I haven't seen you for a month. And then I know like, okay, now I'm either not showing up or haven't really been, kind of putting enough attention towards my relationship with her.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that may, for sure, the intimacy part is the first part. And so all the rest will kind of come out of that. It's hard to have the proper, let's say, balance of power in the relationship if you're not close. And so that's definitely the case. And it's, for those of us that are really involved in a lot of things and have projects and have, all these things that they're doing, it's easy to get pulled away and just feel like that the mission you're doing is the most important, so, but it is a reminder that, and I think that's one of the things I also kind of brought back from Mount Athos, is just kind of having a lot of time to sit there and pray for my family, to pray for my wife and for my kids, and realize that priority, right? It's like, okay, so, you're doing all these things, people, because it's also inebriating. Like in my case, it becomes inebriating because people write you and they, they're saying, I'm going to church now, and they thank you for helping them. And so you think like, this is it. Like, this is, wow.
Yeah,
this
you
is
feel like
amazing.
You're earning your salvation through your work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, that's not what's most important. And for sure, the bedrock of your relationship with your kids, with your wife, is that's what'll keep you grounded and keep you headed, looking in the right direction. So
yeah, it's been a massive insight for me to realize that, the Christian path to salvation has two roads on it. It's the monastic or through marriage. Like, those are the two approaches that we understand that one can earn one's salvation. And so my marriage to my wife is eternal, and what I gain in, that's where I'm learning how to love, and all the appearances of love that I have that I can show on the internet and my YouTube channel or whatever it is, like, none of that means anything if I haven't learned to love my wife first. It's very easy to make, be on social media and appear as a loving person, but to actually learn the hard practice of actually loving another human being when you're living together with them and sleeping in the same bed, that's that's where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah,
right?
well, that's where you could really test the reality of what you're going through. You can have all this spiritual insight or spiritual feel that you're spiritually advancing, but if it's not landing in your immediate relationships, then it's not yeah.
Great. Okay, thanks Jonathan, and really appreciate you opening up the lid. I'm sure there's lots of people out there who want to it's really interesting. I've heard you talk a lot about this thing of having an online avatar and how that influences one, and I don't know how to handle it myself yet, but
yeah. Well, for sure, I mean, to be honest, if people have been paying attention to what I'm doing, I'm actually pulling away quite a bit from the social media. I still post things once in a while, but much less than before, just trying to be more present, because I'm traveling, and so when I'm not traveling, I'm just trying to be more present here and involved here.
Good. Okay. So the next point that I wanted to go into, which is related to how to have a strong marriage with your wife, is we found like there's one really central ingredient. Of course, being a member of the church and a part of a faith that's providing the energy and the source of love for that. But then we've spoken a lot about the idea of paternal love. So that, when you think about this relationship between the man and his wife, or between God and the church, then there's this idea that love can have a particularly paternal expression as opposed to the maternal expression. The mother loves the child in a different way than the father does. And there's the kind of like a more hierarchical nature to paternal love as opposed to maternal, where you're with and holding the paternal love. But there's still a kind of a meeting of truth and compassion, perhaps. And we spoke about two main aspects of how we can experience this paternal love. Of course, the spiritual father is one way, where often the parish priest is the first person that we're developing. I will have a deep appreciation of the guy who, it was a very imperfect man, but the Orthodox priest who brought me into the Orthodox faith the first time. He was the one who first showed me through the sacraments, but also just through himself, his being, and through our personal relationship, to be able to be brought into the church. And then the other one that we said is that, you know, there is a need today, or at least we've been greatly benefited, all of us, from brotherhood as well. And all love and brotherhood actually has a paternal aspect to it, where we're kind of lifting up and supporting our brothers in areas where we are, you know, just there's specific areas where we're specialized in, where we're better than them, and then we're humble to receive from them, and then we're able to contribute to them as well. And it's in some ways, it's in the conciliar structure of the church, all the way up there as well, down to, you know, in the individual parish where the members of, where often having a good group of men, at least for me, it's an essential aspect of being in an Orthodox church, is that there's other guys there that I can relate to.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great. You know, it's like, the parish I went to for several years, there was like 15 people on a Sunday, good, you know, on a good Sunday. And there were also all from very, very far away. And so, you know, I never had that until very recently. And so now in the church, in our parish, now there's a whole slew of converts that are coming in, and they're mostly younger guys. And it's great because, you know, obviously some of them come, you know, they've seen my videos, some of them, you know, all the kind of YouTube Orthodox world. And so they come in, not just through that, but through some of that, like there's some of that kind of bring them in. And it's weird because I tend to resist, playing any kind of role. And I don't totally understand why. I think it's also because I have a weird outsider quality to myself, which isn't to my benefit, but it just is something about how I am. I think it's one of the reasons why I sometimes am able to have certain insights, is because I have a strange outsider quality to myself. But I agree. It's like, I know what you're saying is true, but I think in my own personal life, it's been a struggle to have that, to kind of keep that going, in terms of having a group of male friends that can kind of encourage you and help you. I haven't really had that much in my life. I've had a few friends, you know, my best friend, who probably played mostly that role, passed away 2 years ago. And it's like, you know, now I have friends like that. They're all far away. It's like, around me, I don't have this, but if you're able to get it, I would say it's wonderful. And it sounds like something that, something that we all should have. But sadly, in my case, it's not something that I've benefited from in my life.
But when you speak about your dad and your brother, then I really get the impression that they've played a very solid role in that capacity in your life, of being male minds that you've really been formed by interacting with.
Yeah, but it is really a lot in terms of the mind, you know. And so it's like my father, I mean, my father maybe more in terms of just being an example of an awesome man. Like, my father is just an example in every way, you know, someone who sacrificed much to be where he is, someone who has lived for others, you know, and sacrificed himself for us so much. So it's like, he is definitely a model in that sense. With my brother, it is mostly in terms of the kind of this world of mind, you know, like we you know, we have a similar way of thinking, and so we kind of dive into that. And so in that case, for sure, like I feel like that in terms of ideas and in terms of vision, we've definitely been close in that sense, you know.
Yeah, but there is a risk, you know. My own father has had a lot of strong male friends. He's been active in a Protestant church his entire life, you know, as a minister and a pastor. But then in the last 15 years or so, he's kind of like, you know, all his friends have moved off and something like that. And I think he would say himself, and he has said this himself to me, I don't think it's unfair to say, you know, he was moving into a state of stagnation, because he had my mom and they're incredibly close, and they have a fantastic, very beautiful, very loving relationship. But there weren't other male guys that were, you know, pushing him, asking him difficult questions, holding him to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And so he's actually joined Maniphesto Core today, and he's a member on one of our groups. He's one of the elders, and plays an amazing role in that group. Like the guys they love him there. And he says he's given him like, an extra lease of life, basically.
Like a new energy. Yeah.
New energy
that sounds
so
wonderful.
I think there is a risk of, and it's if you look on society wise as well, then, as guys get older, their wife maintains a good social network, but we kind of don't continue to push out and still build and maintain these things, right?
Yeah, that's totally true. I've seen it around me, and I have, in some ways, recently I have also been conscious of that and being wary that will happen to me. Find myself in my 60s, just kind of like you said, alone with my wife, and so there's definitely but it's true. It's like there's definitely I've definitely been more conscious of it and more deliberate about maintaining. I've been I have to confess, like in my life, I've been very horrible at maintaining friendships, like just really bad at it. Not because I don't like people, not because I don't care for them, but just because on the one hand, my quality is my idol, right? It's like I love the world of ideas and the mind and of creativity and everything, and so I tend to navigate in that world. And focus on the things that I'm doing and the things that I love, and then I forget to call my friend for 6 months and don't and so it's and it's interesting because something's happened to me recently to provoke me on that count. A very old friend of mine from when I was 14 years old, someone I met at a summer camp, who I'd had a very intense, it's hard to explain, when you meet someone and you have this really kind of bonding experience where you feel like there's some brotherhood, right, that establishes itself really fast. And that happened to me when I was 14. And I kept seeing this person, once a year until I was about 18. And we always had this very intense relationship. And then that person vanished from my life completely, just didn't know where they were, changed their names, moved. I had no idea where they were. Where this person was. And so I looked for him for years, And then in the last, about 3 years ago, he found me on YouTube and then, called me, and we started. And now it's like I have this person and I really have to be deliberate about it because I love him. But if I follow my natural tendency, I will just do my things and forget to call him, forget to contact him. And so it's like I have to really discipline myself to do that. And it's been helpful for me for that to happen, and I see the same with my relationship with Jordan Peterson. It's like it's pushing me to really kind of maintain a relationship with someone that I care about deeply, but it's so counterintuitive to me, and it's so, in a way you could say that's one of my sins, right? Is like I just struggle to maintain, to stay involved in relationships. So it's something that I think I'm learning maybe very late in my life, but hopefully I'm getting better at.
Well, thanks for sharing. I will say, first of all, I'll say I watched it was about 6-9 months ago, something like that, the interview you had with Jordan Peterson, and I was just really touched by what I saw as an incredibly powerful and good model of being a friend. In that conversation. So I really think it's something, maybe, you don't need many friends. I think that's maybe one of our misunderstandings, is that we have to have lots and lots of friends. One or two friends is enough, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
Good guys in your life. That's what I'm seeing more and more. It's like I've had most of my life having a broad network of friends, but a real lack of depth. And I've more and more seen just having one good friend that really knows me well. I've been calling the same guy every single morning of my life now for about 3 years now at 9
That's
o'clock
amazing.
in the morning.
See, when you say something like that, it's like, how is that? I don't understand. I love it. I think it's wonderful. I think it's encouraging to think that you could do that. It's like, I can't imagine doing that. Not that I don't love people, not that I don't, it's like even my own parents, I don't, I can go several weeks without calling my own parents, which is like I said, it's a confession that I'm making. But yeah, so I mean, I definitely have a lot to learn on that and a lot to improve on that front, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jonathan, I definitely consider you a good friend. I've been touched by just knowing how many demands must be on your time and that you find space and time to connect, and there's a real a loving brotherly attitude every single time we connect with each other. So
definitely.
I feel you're a little unfair on yourself, I'd say.
Well, I mean, I know, but I know myself, right? I like, you're a good example, right? You're actually a good example where it's like, I like talking to you, I enjoy it, and I feel like we did have very strong conversations and kind of even helpful conversations for me in terms of moments where we've talked alone about our own situation and our own families or whatever. But then, I can wake up and I haven't emailed you in 6 months. And that's my sin. It's like, how, these relationships don't maintain themselves. So thank you for your kind words, but I also know where I'm lacking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting topic that I think we can understand better, actually, of how and in what ways to do that. But let's move on.
Yeah, we can move on.
But yeah, I definitely think for a lot of guys, like having other guys around that are on the same journey that they're on, it's essential for guys who are coming into the faith. A lot of people we're talking to are people who are on the outskirts of Orthodoxy or recently converted into Orthodoxy, and but also, like, I think a lot of men, as they go into 40s and 50s or even 60s, then they need to take a next step in being able to see life and existence from a new perspective, from a deeper way of like, there's been a pattern of being that's been working for them up to now, but they're suddenly reaching a point where it's not working anymore. And a lot of guys crash, and it can be extremely painful. And I think having other men around to bounce ideas off that are going through the same thing or have already been through it, in a mentor relationship, that seems to
be. Well, like you said, seems that your dad moving into a mentor role, that's what needs to happen, right? At that age. It's once your kids are gone, your kids are moved out and you're heading towards retirement, it's like you have to find that connection and mentorship, because so many people, I mean, I've seen it so many times, so many people retire and just cease to exist. Like it's like a fast downhill slope after they retire, because they don't have that connection that drive that will keep them going. But mentorship is definitely something that people need to consider when they get older.
It's funny how, as we, for me, I'm really lucky that I had these insights in my 30s that like human connection is such an essential part of being. And it's not just, the abstract idea of human connection, but it's through like very concrete personal relationships with other human beings. And so, yeah, what I think it's natural for some way for men to think that, like, as a young guy, it's about like achievements of things that he does. And humans are, it's so easy to see other human beings as a medium to reach the goals that I'm reaching, right? Instead of, and the human beings, and it's really taken time for me to realize, like, no, it's the people that I'm with that are the goal, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's totally right. It's one of those things where it's true, but then you just catch yourself not acting like it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, this is, I mean, a lot of the time on the Iron Sharpens Iron podcast, we talk about the challenges that guys are facing. And I think we've covered some of the big ones now. But it's been useful for me to see, like, kind of like what one could call sins of the left and sins of the right. Where on the left-hand side, we have kind of, like the lust, and there's pornography, there's sexualization of our society, and all those kinds of things. And then there's also the right hand, which is obviously pride, first of all, and then everything that comes under there. In the Orthodox faith, I think I've been often, and I still struggle with judgmentalism, and kind of looking down on other people as well.
Yeah, it's made much worse by internet orthodoxy, because
this book here, it's the spiritual counsels of St. Paisios, called Passions and Virtues. Did you get to visit his home on Mt Athos?
No.
Okay, yeah, I got to. It was amazing going there, just like being there and like being able to like venerate his icon in his own little chapel in his home. I mean, that was totally crazy. But there was that just made me think of, so right in the book, in the beginning of that book, there's a sentence where he talks about like anger as, or the passions generally, God doesn't give weaknesses, he gives powers.
Yeah.
And so the irascible elements in the human being, maybe I can just read it. As he says, anger indicates that the soul possesses manliness, which helps in the spiritual life. One who is not hot-tempered and lacks manliness won't be able to put himself and his ego into place. An irascible person utilizes the power of his in the spiritual life. He's like a car racing steadily on a straight road.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That makes a lot of sense. And so in some ways it is the responsibility of the spiritual fathers, of the priests, of the church, to redirect the energy that all these young guys come in with, which is a great energy, and redirect it. Some of the priests that I met have been wonderful at that. There's a priest who told me that what he does with all the new converts is he tells them that during coffee hour, they shouldn't sit around and talk. They should help. They should get up. They should help with the service, help doing things. They should clean the tables. It's like, that's what they should do. It's like put their energy at the service of others first, so people can kind of train themselves instead of sitting around a table and complaining about who's a heretic. Get that energy towards serving others. Those priests are usually pretty strong, and they're doing it in a way that's almost like, no, like, I'm the priest, you do that, right? It's like, and the guys actually respect that, right? They respect, they like you said, they have this need to also find a leader, to find someone that they can kind of trust and knows that they want the good for their soul, but also are strong. So
yeah, I mean, so I just did an interview with Fr Josiah Trenham, and that just exploded my YouTube channel. And it's so clear, the way the video starts off is Fr Josiah says, Paul, this idea that life is supposed to be easy, it's so girly. You got to kill it. Just stab it, put it to death. Life is a struggle. It has to be hard. Anything of value is hard. And if you want an easy life, you will never do anything of significance. That was what he said.
That's hilarious.
And people just love that, right?
People love it.
Yeah.
That's funny. No, that makes sense. I never met Fr Josiah. I'm going to meet him in May. I'm going to California, and we're actually going to do a little thing in his parish. So yeah, thank God for that.
Okay, great. I just looked through on his parish website on the catechism process. So my catechism involved like come along to the services, and then after 6 months I had a chat with the priest, and then I got baptized, and I got so much out of that. It's been a beautiful and amazing process, and I learned so much from it, right? But they have like these forms that you have to fill out, where you have to go through like this long list of heresies and like write about like which ones they are. You have to write down like, who your patron saint is and what lessons you've learned from their life, and why a patron saint is important, how you're going to celebrate your patron saint day, and then like all kinds of stuff. And I just thought like, this is exactly what young men are looking for. And I said to you before we started this conversation as well, it's like, I've been kind of playing this like, free artistic life before I became an Orthodox Christian. And actually these days, more and more, I'm realizing as well, like what I need is a guy who can say like, Paul, go and do this. Paul, go and do that. And I don't care what it is, actually. There's such a freedom in being told what to do.
I hope you care a little what it is. You gotta get, you have to care a little what it is. But I understand what you're saying, and that makes sense. And I've seen it too.
I more care about the character of the man telling me to do it than what he tells me to do. I have to admit, though, like, I have to trust him to be a man who's orientated towards God.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's great. I sadly, I'm not totally there. Like I do retain a lot of critical sense, and it's probably, I don't know if it's to my own fault. It's possible that it is, even when I was on Mt Athos, it was interesting because like you would meet sometimes, like, let's say, the abbot of a monastery or someone who's a little older who would be like, you could feel like they're trying to kind of tell you what to do or kind of give you advice. And my natural tendency is to not say no, but to fall into a position of wondering, like just of kind of analyzing, trying to figure out, what's behind it. And so I'm saying this as a confession, right? I'm not saying this is how you should be, but I tend to be more like that, and so I admire what you're saying. It's like, okay, so it's like, I want to be this, I want to be a a kind of soldier for God and a kind of soldier for the church. I think that's great. And you're right. Like I've seen, some of the churches that I've met, that I've seen, that have been the most lively and the most, let's say, growing and moving, have been churches that are extremely demanding. It's, I've met a priest who was like, people have to go to confession before every communion. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but we expect people to commune pretty much every week, which means that you have to, like on Saturdays, all your Saturdays, you have to go to Vespers and then go to confession if you want to go on to church on Sunday and commune, which is like, that's amazing. It's like, I would probably be very unhappy if my priest forced me to do that. But when I see it, and I see also what it does in terms of giving this energy to the church and this sense that it's like, this is what we're doing, right? Our salvation is our purpose. I find it astounding. Yeah. Not that I wish my priest would do that. Let's just say that. Let's just say that straight out. But I get it, right? I see it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what that is the practice where we are as well.
So you go to confession for every communion. Can you do it in the morning, or do you have to go before?
Yeah, most of the time we do it in the morning, or sometimes actually a lot of the time it's even just before we take the communion that he holds another confession.
Yeah,
so
well,
you can get like some people in before the service, and then the first time we saw people like having confession during the service, my wife thought it was very strange. Actually, I really felt like, wow, this is very intimate. Like it was very much like a family thing kind of thing, right? Because he did it in the church.
Yeah. That's easier. But this priest was saying, no, we have too many people. We're not doing confession on Sundays. We're doing it on Saturdays. And so, you'd have like, so you end up having like 100 people going to Vespers, and then all those people coming on Sundays, which is astounding if you can get that to happen. I mean, it's almost monastic. So
so no, our church, we fast from Thursday evening up until we go to the vegan fast, right? Up until liturgy on Sunday midday, and we have to confess. And if we don't have Vespers that often because it's just not held.
Not practical.
We have a traveling priest that comes, so he sometimes arrives only on the Sunday. But yeah, I really we do feel that it just adds a whole extra layer of and depth by having that confession every single time. Now we can hardly imagine not doing it. Actually, we sometimes go to churches where it's not required, but now we do it because it gives us a lot, I think. Yeah. So good. There's a couple of directions that I could be taking this.
You're making this more personal than what I'm used to talking about, Paul. So I love you for it, but it's like it's not it's not easy for me to do this because I also know it's public, so it's like I have to be careful when in public discussions. I try to be I don't want to expose myself to the world.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing what you've shared. It's really interesting to understand the man behind the role.
Yeah.
When you're talking about like, kind of like friendship and that kind of thing as well, then I also, I was one of the guys who saw Jordan Peterson, then saw you talking to Jordan Peterson, and it changed my life. And so I had these kind of like incredibly inspiring men who had shifted my very understanding of reality, that had deep consequences for everything that I was doing, starting with my marriage, my relationship with a woman, but going into every single aspect of my work and my personal life and everything. And I realized very quickly that I could very easily create like an idol of you guys, or like it's not you who's out there, that I don't have access to who you are. So I realized like, okay, if I'm going to follow this guy, I need to get to know him. So I remember I was actually I did like a personal vision retreat, and I was actually up in a little out in the countryside, a little summer house that I'd borrowed for a weekend, and I was staying there by myself. And I was like, okay, well, I need to get to talk to this Jonathan guy. And I'd written to you a couple of times and you hadn't responded. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to sign up for his highest level, Patreon level. Where I know
I remember that's how it started. And that's when we talked for the first time.
No, that was what, four years ago or something like that, I guess, right? And it's been so important, and it's given me so much more I can understand all of the high level ideas that I get from you and are far more integrated as well, because I know you as a human being.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing, but I'm going to take just a moment here to give a little bit of an explanation about the work that I'm doing in Maniphesto. So one way of looking at it is that we're really taking the ideas from Jonathan here and guys like Jordan Peterson and trying to look, how are we implementing that in a practical life as a bunch of guys that are developing and growing together. So we have these online groups that are meeting every single week. They formulate a vision and goals, and then they're working on habits to be implementing the stuff on an everyday level. So if you find this interesting and necessary, and then you're also noticing that there can be a disconnect in your life between the ideas and the things that are inspiring you and then what your everyday life looks like, that's exactly the case for me, so there's nothing abnormal about that. But if you would like to have a bit of extra help in working on that, then check out Maniphesto. There's a link in the description for this video here, and maybe you'd like to come and join us on a Maniphesto core group. So that was it. Thanks very much, and back to the interview.
And so it comes in that context of having kind of met you and known you as well, I think. So I think there's a value to this. I'm absolutely happy to share the recording with you, and if there's something that you feel like, oh, that was
no, it's totally fine. Like I mean, I think it's great. It's good. It's pushing me in directions that I'm not used to going. So
yeah,
we need that in our life. That's what you're saying, right? It's like we also need men to push us a bit and kind of push
absolutely,
us
and
further than what we're used to.
And the biggest problem in Western society is that we live our life up here in the world of ideas, and the internet feeds that. And instead, what we need is to get down into the level of the everyday practicalities of things. And so I think guys having, if I can give that massive group of men out there who are saying like, wow, Jonathan PAGEAU, he's just like he's almost like an angel.
No,
and then they're saying, okay, well, he's also a man.
Yeah, it's good that they have a more reasonable perception of who I am. It's like I struggle with the same things everybody else struggles with in terms of sin, in terms of daily prayer, in terms of my relationships. It's like I'm just in that sense I'm a normal Christian, Orthodox Christian.
And I gotta say, Jonathan, like, this is one of the big issues that I think that guys are facing as well. And this was one of the first fundamental things that I learned when I started doing this men's work stuff. And that is that we all have this idea that there's something about ourselves that we don't want other people to know because we're scared that they will judge us negatively and they won't like us as much if we tell them. And so I've done this exercise with people where we've done it in groups where, and I don't do this kind of thing anymore, but it was valuable for me back then, is you share to another person the thing that you're most afraid that they would find out about. And then afterwards, you ask that person, how do you see me now that I've told you that? And the response is always exactly the same. It's exactly the same every single time, is I like you much, much more since you told me that thing that you were the most afraid that I would find out about you. So there is something about that. We put this false self out into the world and we project it out there because we want people to like us. But people can actually sense that inauthenticity in us as well.
Yeah. Well, like the early church did public confessions. That's actually how confession started. But there's also a reason why it moved towards private confession, is that it's like you do also have to be careful what you reveal to people, because some people don't have the best intentions, and so I think that if you can find people that you can really, it's like, obviously it's like if I go to confession, I don't hold back. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to say all the things, all the thoughts, all this, like it's that's inevitable. But if you're able to find people that aren't priests that you can do that with, I think that's great. But I would be cautious to like just reveal everything of my life. Like
it's my 9 o'clock buddy call where I talk about everything, much more than even with my wife. And I really believe that like familiarity breeds contempt. My grandmother always told me, and I believe that's true. It's like, this idea, and it's a very modern woke idea, I think, that it's all just about being vulnerable. I don't think that's true at all.
No.
But I don't know. I don't actually have a good rule of thumb of how to find that line. Certainly you can cast pearls before swine, right?
Yeah, I think that's what, I mean, I would be afraid of that, but I think it's great. I mean, I think that like doing it as an exercise, like you're saying, that's a pretty powerful thing. And also because we all have our crooked parts, like we all have things that we're ashamed of. We all have, and so I think that to realize that we all do, is probably, it's probably a good experience to have.
Yeah. And most people realize the thing, most people think like, oh, I'm the only person who has this problem. And they found out, no, all the other guys around me have the exact same problems. Like there's like 4 or 5 problems that most guys are struggling with. It's all the same. It's like
all the same.
Always hear the same 4 or 5 things.
Yeah. Well, that's for sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm sure priests are often bored at hearing our confessions because just all the same for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe it'll be good to hear a little bit about, like, I was thinking of going like Mary Theotokos and the role of that. And there's something interesting there, and maybe you'll even build it in. But actually, I'd actually like to hear you talk about like, what is the priesthood? What does that role mean? And how can men see themselves as the priest of their family, of the little church of their family? Like, do you have any ideas from a symbolic perspective?
Yeah.
Like how does that work?
Well, I mean, the way the priesthood works is to understand that hierarchy is something which exists in levels, right? So you have levels. That's how a hierarchy works. And so even if we think of the priesthood in terms of the way the Orthodox Church functions, it's already a hierarchy. So your priest is actually not the person responsible for you, right? The person responsible for you is your bishop. And the priest exists through the blessing of the bishop. And so even just to understand that, is to kind of understand how priesthood works. It's a hierarchy of authority that kind of comes down from above. And so that is also how we are supposed to be in our fatherhood, is to understand that. And so it helps you understand that it's like the authority as a father that I have doesn't come from me. It comes from my submission to God. It comes from my submission to Christ. That's where it comes from. In the same way that the priest's authority comes from the bishop, right? And the bishop's authority comes from the synod, and the synod's authority comes from, the tradition comes from God. Like it all kind of comes down from above. And so that is the best way to understand, let's say, the priesthood of the father in the family, is to understand that it is a true relationship of authority, but it is one which has to be anchored in a higher authority, or else it becomes perverted and tyrannical. And so that prevents it from just being a game of power, but it also reveals how it's actually quite beautiful, and that it continues to play down into even yourself, right? So you have that in you, where you have your body, you have your multiplicity, your passions, or whatever, and then you have the nous, or the spirit that kind of manages all that together. And so that is in some ways the way that the father is supposed to be for the family, to be a pillar, to be a vector of stability, or a vector of identity, a place where the whole family can kind of look for the basic direction of what is our culture as a family, what are our priorities, what are we moving towards. So I think that that's probably the best way that I would understand that.
And would you say that the parish priest is the source of the authority for the man in his in that family role that he has? Is that the equivalent of his bishop?
I mean, it depends. I mean, in terms of your own spiritual life, like for sure, like the priest will act, your confessor especially will act as a kind of spiritual authority on you, depending on if you go confess to your parish priest. It depends on your situation, but usually your confessor especially will have a kind of spiritual authority over you that comes from their bishop, and then that will that should act as an anchor for you to act as a father in your own relationship, in your own family.
Yeah. Okay. So from a symbolic perspective, like I had a very early on in our kind of entrance into Orthodoxy, then I remember having this experience, first of all, of realizing like, wow, the vast majority of the time I can actually just be obedient to my priest. And I don't have to worry about the details of what he tells me, because that's his responsibility. And so as long as I'm not being asked to sin, then I can just be obedient and follow, and I can do that, and I can be absolutely at rest with doing those things, which is a massive release of responsibility in some ways. And then I also had a conversation with my wife where I said to her, like, in the case of there being a difference of opinion between our parish priest and me, then what I said to her is, I said that, well, in that case, actually, your kind of source of authority, your immediate source of authority is me. And so it would be more important, unless, no, actually I said to her, like, you need to, like, that would be the thing. And that was something that luckily it's never been anywhere close to being an issue. And it's
but in terms of authority, like
that we've been able to stand together even in difficult times in the parish.
Yeah. And it's important to understand that one of the aspects of hierarchy is that hierarchy, we always think of hierarchy always as the enabling capacity that it gives, but it also is a limiting capacity that is, like you said, it's an image of a dysfunctional priest, or a sign of a dysfunctional priest would be if that priest tries to insert himself between you and your wife. Like, that would be a sign of a dysfunctional priest, and a trigger to be careful, because that's one of the reasons for hierarchy. One of the reasons for hierarchy is that the hierarchy above doesn't constantly supplant the subsidiaries of that authority, and so when the state tries to tell you how to raise your kids, that there's something wrong, like there's something off about the way in which hierarchy is establishing itself. And so, and especially in the Orthodox Church, right? So we don't have a pope the way that exists in the Catholic Church. Like, we don't have even though we have the ecumenical patriarch is not the bishop of every city, right? The ecumenical patriarch cannot be the priest of every parish. Whereas in the Catholic Church, you have the sense that the Pope can be the priest in every parish, right? The Pope is the bishop of every city, and so the respecting of that hierarchy is really important. And it's the same even like with you and in your family, where when you lead your children, you also have to respect their own inner hierarchy, right? You can't enter into their intention and enter into their hearts and try to manage, how they live their lives. You have to do it from the position of the father of the family, and also let the children, figure it out in terms of their own inner hierarchy, and the same even with your wife. Like, your wife is like your, is the enactor of the authority often in the family. And you have to be careful not to compromise that even in your role as an authority.
There's so much nuance about hierarchy and the way that it works, and the multifaceted, multi-layered, fractal stuff.
Yeah, but it's not that complicated.
I think we really have just lost out from understanding. I've been in the Danish Home Guard, and looking how the hierarchy works in the military has been so beneficial for me.
Yeah.
When something has to happen in the military, then the division commander or whatever it is, he gives a 5-point order, and then everything happens from there. So it's like, the Logos comes, it gives the order, but then even in the small group, like the fire teams in the groups, like the leader of the group, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't even have like a direction that he has to be like, watching out for. He's just kind of there, and everything that's done is done by the rest of the guys. And so much we have like, the leader, he has to do everything, right? And he has to be the one who's visible and everything, that kind of stuff. It's like, even the military gets like, a far more nuanced understanding of the way that this works, which...
Yeah, and if it's a proper hierarchy in the military, it's the same. It's like the higher level ups, they trust their lower, the different groups to know what they're doing enough that they give the general direction, And then they're not telling the fire guard or whatever how to do their job. It's like, no, they know how to do their job. As long if it's aligned with the direction that I've given, then I just let them do it. And that's really the way that proper hierarchy should be played out.
Absolutely. Good. Well, thanks very much, Jonathan. We have a whole season on As Iron Sharpens Iron to dive into this. I hope that we're going to get another chat with you. I know that Father Michael and Father Hens are really happy and keen to be having the conversation with you as well. So we're going to use this as well as more material for the rest of our season. And really good talking to you again as well.
Yeah, and I wish you all the best with this new project. I think it's great. I think it's important. You know, we all know that the question of masculinity is so up in the air in terms of general culture, and also I think, you know, even in the church we kind of see effects of that, and so it's good that you're taking that difficult subject on.
Yeah, well, thanks for giving a very, very big contribution, an enabling contribution for my case at least, for that to happen. So thanks a lot.
It's a joy.
Good.